Quote, "We tortured some folks." That's how U.S. President Barack Obama succinctly put it back in August. A damning report details the sometimes gruesome and often brutal torture used in the CIA's interrogation program. Joining us now for more on the report's findings, Janice Stein, TVO's foreign affairs analyst and of the Munk School of Global Affairs at U of T, and Kamran Bukhari, advisor on Middle East and South Asia with Stratfor. He's also author of Political Islam in the Age of Democratization, and it's good to have you two back here in our makeshift studios in Leaside for just a little bit longer anyway. I've got a bit to read here, gang, as we just bring everybody up to scratch on this, so get comfortable. And Sheldon, let's bring these graphics up and remind everybody what is in this Senate report. Here we go. In the report, it was revealed that detainees were forced to stand shackled for hours or days, sometimes with their hands above their heads or on broken limbs. There was extreme sleep deprivation, also used, usually in standing or in stress positions, sometimes for more than a week at a time. At least 5 detainees were subjected to rectal rehydration or rectal feeding without documented medical necessity. At least 3 detainees were threatened with harm to their families, including to their children, sexual assault of their mother, or to cut a detainee's mother's throat. The report suggests that waterboarding, which we heard so much about 2 years ago, was used more often and more intensely than previously reported. And we've got a bit more here as well. There were a total of 119 prisoners interrogated by the CIA program. 39 detainees were subjected to the CIA's so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. At least 26 prisoners were wrongly held, including an intellectually challenged man whose CIA detention was used solely as leverage to get a family member to provide information. 7 of the 39 detainees who were subjected to enhanced interrogation produced no intelligence at all while in CIA custody. Okay, those are the highlights, obviously, of a much, much longer report. Janice, first question to you. What did this report tell us we didn't already know?
Not much, Steve, but it did tell us something. One particular issue where we now know more is the CIA had previously claimed that these, quote, enhanced interrogations, which frankly is just torture, had produced actionable evidence, that it had prevented attacks. If you read the Senate Intelligence Report, and you know this is now a disputed document because everybody has excerpted, we're just seeing an executive summary. But that having been said, what the report tells us is no, that is not the case, that the actionable intelligence came from these prisoners before they were tortured.
So they didn't need to be tortured to get that information.
So what this tells us, they got no value from the torture. People will say anything under torture.
Kamran, what would you add to that?
I'd agree with Janice. I'd say that there are 2 things that we have that we didn't previously know, a little bit more detail, you know, and now we have the Senate basically putting an official stamp saying, yes, the CIA did this. Previously it was, you know, well, reports. The agency could say, well, these are leaked reports, they're not right, and they contested them. So now we have a very powerful body of the United States government saying this actually happened. So that's the difference.
The Senate report also found that the interrogations were, and the quote here is, brutal and far worse than the CIA represented to policymakers and others. CIA misrepresenting what they were doing is essentially the allegation here. Any surprise there?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it's disturbing to know that a congressional oversight is sort of being bypassed, or if there's an attempt to bypass it, if indeed the CIA did misrepresent itself and did not reveal everything to the congressional investigation. No, in the sense that, you know, in this game, I mean, we can say it's torture, whatnot. After 9/11. I can actually see how this could have happened. You know, I'm not rationalizing it, I'm not justifying it.
But there's fear through the Capitol and all bets are off, therefore.
Yes, and so when you are told by the President of the United States that I need to know whether there's going to be another attack, how big is this organization, what will it take to take it down, and the CIA chief is looking at his department heads and saying, what do we know, and they don't know much, then we can see how it went from there to where we are right now.
Janice?
You know, the only other thing I think that's interesting, and Cameron's not going to be surprised, I'm not surprised, is when the CIA briefs the president, we would normally think that that's a complete briefing, but it's actually not. And what they always do is give the president plausible deniability. They withhold those details, so if he's ever asked, he can honestly say, no, I didn't know. So that's, in a sense, a bigger picture issue.
But the condition of plausible deniability is, I think, what also goes with that is, if you hang me out to dry, it's your job.
Yes.
No one seems to have resigned over this.
Well, you know, plausible deniability is at the core of this whole story in a way, because we shouldn't be surprised it happens in the private sector too. You don't tell the CEO, but you tell him just enough to let him know there may be a problem, but you don't give him any details. But the other side of the deal is that CEO protects you. And so what you're seeing is President Bush and all the officials in that administration come out now in a fierce defense of the CIA, because that's the deal.
So who, okay, if this plausible deniability business is going on here, and it looks like it was, who exactly knew what was exactly going on?
It's a very good question, and I would respond to it in the following manner. Look, in any intelligence agency, this is a massive bureaucracy. We're talking about a very small group of people at the operational tactical level who actually know what's going on. Look, the head of the CIA does not say, go torture someone. He says, this is what we need to do, general strategic guidance. How do you operationalize it? It goes down to the department heads, then to the specific department that's dealing with detainees and whatnot, and it goes further down. And, you know, in other words, very few people know, and in addition to the plausible deniability factor, there's also the standard operating procedure of intelligence agencies, which is need to know. So it just goes up to where it matters. Beyond that, nobody talks about it.
There's one other issue that we should put on the table here, Steve. There were legal opinions.
On what's torture and what's enhanced interrogation, on what's... On what side of the line, right?
That's right. And these, so who knows what? The general legal opinion covered enhanced interrogation techniques. That then gets pushed down. What is interesting, the other piece was interesting, is that we did have CIA officials who were disgusted and wanted to be relieved of their responsibilities over it. And they got pushback from headquarters saying, no, 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 keep going. So at least one or two levels up, people knew.
But the justification, if I remember all this, the justification for the CIA engaging in these, again, Dick Cheney language here, enhanced interrogation techniques, okay, was that it was effective and saved lives.
That's right. And that's why, to me, the most interesting piece in the Senate report was it didn't. It didn't. They got that. They're not denying, by the way, and it's important that we make this distinction. They're not denying that they got valuable evidence, for instance, from Sheikh Mohammed, right? That prevented further attacks. But he gave that evidence. He talked before they tortured him.
Before they waterboarded him.
Yeah.
Is that your understanding too?
Well, I would add to that by saying, look, when you take someone out of the battle space, out of the battlefield, you remove him, he's arrested, you have him in custody. By the time you interrogate him, use enhanced interrogation techniques or torture, he's far removed from the battle. The information he knows is stale already. Look, it's not just the CIA or the people doing the interrogation that are using intelligence methods. The enemy is also. The enemy knows that, look, once a guy is taken captive, or he's been arrested, picked up, all the operations that he was running have to be scrapped. And they have to start from scratch. So, because that would compromise their security, operational security. So what you're getting out of torture is basically nothing related to preventing an attack. Maybe on the location of someone.
Well, they did get. Actually, what's interesting, they did get out of Sheikh Mohammed Khalid. They did.
Sheikh Mohammed.
Yeah, they did. But he gave it quite easily. Right? And so if you put yourself on the ground and you have him, and he's a prize asset because he was so informed, and he gives you this information early on, if you're the interrogator, you don't know if he's given it all or he's given part. And so you push further and you push further and you cross that line.
Let me pick up on that, Janice, because again, we're 13 years plus removed from 9/11 right now. Let's remember, let's put ourselves at the time.
Right.
At the time, America had just sustained 3,000 deaths. I mean, the worst attack on the homeland ever. And It was the classic ticking time bomb syndrome. You never knew if the next one was just around the corner. Does that excuse any of what's in the report?
It explains it, right?
Okay.
Which is different from it excuses it. It certainly explains it. And we know for a fact that intelligence estimates at the time, Steve, were that other big attacks were imminent. That's what they were working on. And those were fairly broad-scale intelligence estimates.
But doesn't excuse it, you don't believe?
No, because
it's not effective.
Well, we can make two arguments here, and the report was structured in an interesting way. Dianne Feinstein, who clearly led this process, so she's about
California
to leave.
senator.
Yeah, and she's about to leave the Senate now, so perhaps she was more forthcoming than she might otherwise have been. But here's how she structured the report. It was all about, it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. And then the last bit of the report was, and it's wrong. Both are true.
Morally wrong, you mean?
Morally wrong.
Yeah.
Both are true. And what happens, and here's the real problem, and you know it when you do it, it boomerangs, because when I can assure there's going to be follow-on action now. And the CIA is going to face restrictions and much more explicit rules. So the leadership knows this. And we've had it in Canada too, with the RCMP and CSIS, and every time this is made public, there are new restrictions that are laid on. So it doesn't work in terms of better information. It doesn't work for the agency, plus it's wrong.
You mentioned Canada, and I want to pick up on that. There's a Canadian angle in this story, eh? Do we know whether Canada actually had a role in the CIA's interrogation program, official or unofficial?
I think that I wouldn't see this CSIS actually being involved in the actual enhanced interrogation techniques. I don't think that that would be the case. But did Canada benefit from the information that came from there? That's another story. So we do have reports that certain detainees were basically detained and then prosecuted based on the information that they got from Abu Zubaydah.
Let me go. Let's put this on the record here. This will take a second, but Abu Zubaydah, waterboarded 83 times according to the report. He is the source of the Canadian government cited a decade ago in court documents about 2 suspects arrested in Canada and detained under this National Security Certificates program, where you can detain people for long periods of time without actually having to charge them. Adil Sharkawi and Mohammed Harkat, these were the 2 guys.
Right.
So there was some impact from all of this
Here's the irony
on Canada.
Right. Of course there's some impact. And more generically, Steve, we're part of what's called a 5 Eyes program, where we share amongst 5 highly trusted partners, United States, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and us. So when you're sharing, and here's the bigger dilemma, when you're sharing information, you can't know whether that information comes out of torture or not, because nobody tells you.
They're not going to tell you.
In this particular case, it's a really interesting story, and it's so complex, and that's what... Yes, Abu Zubaydah was the hidden source, which clearly our people knew. Ultimately, they didn't know he was tortured, but they knew who he was. They didn't reveal the source in these 2 cases. When federal judges challenged that, they then went and produced wiretap evidence of direct conversations.
But no, let's put it this way: no Canadian, you know this, I don't. I'm guessing here. No Canadian official is going to say to his American counterpart in a U.S. spy agency,
"Don't give me.
Tell me how you got this information. No. Did you get it from torture? Because if you did, I can't use it. If you got it legitimately, then I can."
No.
That doesn't happen, right?
No, it doesn't happen because of the following reason. A, the method is not the issue at that point in time. It's the information. I need the information fast. Can I get it? The other thing is, why would the United States officials engaged in this kind of techniques tell anybody that they were torturing? They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't even do that within their own system, let alone a foreign system.
So much for 5 Eyes.
So here's what a Canadian official would say to an American official. Please don't give me any information which results from torture. Ritual handshake, and then they would get on with the business.
So that covers his butt.
Correct.
And also gets him the information that he may want.
Correct.
And everybody just sort of...
Plausible deniability.
Right. Wink, wink,
dispensing
nudge, nudge.
with the formality.
Yes, I got it. There's a senator from Arizona who ran for president a few years ago, named John McCain, who should know something about torture because he was tortured when he was a soldier in Vietnam many decades ago.
For a long time.
Yes. Yeah, he was a prisoner of war for more than 5 years. Okay, let's see what he had to say about all this, shall we? Sheldon, roll the clip, please.
I know from personal experience that the abuse of prisoners will produce more bad than good intelligence. I know that victims of torture will offer intentionally misleading information if they think their captors will believe it. I know they will say whatever they think their torturers want them to say if they believe it will stop their suffering. Most of all, I know the use of torture compromises that which most distinguishes us from our enemies, our belief that all people, even captured enemies, possess basic human rights which are protected by international conventions the United States not only joined, but for the most part authored.
You love that speech, eh, Janice?
I thought it was a great speech. You know, here's a victim of torture himself. People do crack under torture. It's very rare that they don't, frankly, Steve, and they are highly motivated to say anything that their captors want to hear, as John McCain put it. But he said, engaging in torture degrades the United States and degrades any democratic country that does it. So you said earlier, yes, you know, our enemies use this, but they're not us. So I thought that was a wonderful speech.
Okay, the verdict is in. What should the consequences now be?
I actually look at it in a bit of a positive light. I think that, and picking up from what Janice just said, that's not us. Absolutely. What this does is this is an effort by a very powerful institution within the United States government to actually right a wrong and say, okay, look, we did this and we're going to fix it because why? Because we're worried about where we're headed as a country that, or as a nation, as a civilization that believes in the rule of law, basic human rights. We don't want to be equated with the Syrians or the Ba'athist regime of Iraq or Pol Pot in Southeast Asia or anybody else of that magnitude.
The U.S. doesn't torture. That should be the message that goes around the world.
And I think the whole process of revealing this publicly by the Senate is going to help that cause, because this is going to create a debate. It's already done that. And there's going to be improvement. There's going to be checks and balances. So I look at it positively.
So what does it mean for Canada? Where is our oversight of our intelligence agencies that approaches anything like the Senate committee?
Well, we don't have any civilian oversight, do we?
We have some. You know, we have CIRC.
We got CIRC.
We have an individual commissioner for CSIS, but our oversight is so weak in comparison to what we've just seen in the United States. Canadians will trust our intelligence agencies to the extent there's strong parliamentary or civilian oversight. And I think what we saw in Washington, imperfect as it may be, is a very strong message to this country that we have to start to do things differently ourselves.
We have the Security Intelligence Review Committee overseeing what our intelligence services do.
Right.
But to get those security certificates that we talked about earlier, I'm not sure there is any civilian oversight on that.
There's federal judges that participate in doing that, but we have to go deeper, because a federal judge cannot get access to how did you get this information? Who is your source? Where in the Five Eyes did you get it? Because what our agency's answer is, we will compromise the source.
What I don't hear from either one of you, though, is somebody's head needs to be on a platter as a result of all this.
In the United States,
yes.
I think there's going to be a fierce debate. Now, the United Nations has now come out and argued for trials for those who authorized this. Now, you know, Barack Obama, in an effort, he's walked a very fine line here. He has said the United States does not torture. He supported the release of the document, but he's also said he understands why this happens. And I'm dubious, frankly, that he will move ahead to allow the Attorney General's office to charge anybody.
Is that because he doesn't want a witch hunt, or what's yeah?
I mean, one of the problems is that it's a very significant technical problem and leads to sort of the national security issues. So once you have an investigation, you want to put people on, trial for alleged abuse of, powers. That unravels the way intelligence is gathered. That exposes the inner workings of the agency and the wider intelligence community, which, frankly speaking, no one wants to see happen. And then I think that that would undermine, that would compromise methods. It would send to the enemy. We live in a world we can't hide these things. And so that would send to the enemy, you know, precious information of how we do our business.
Steve, we had a case in Canada, very well known, the Maher case, right? Which was based on information. There was a process of rendition. Arar was tortured.
Taken to Syria, wasn't he?
Taken to Syria for a year and tortured. He came back to his and in fact, there was a judicial process in which he was declared essentially innocent, and he was compensated. Nobody who provided that intelligence information in this country was disciplined.
That seems to be the bottom line, regardless of what side of the border you're on.
Right. For the reasons that Kama just talked about, that the argument is covered by we will have to reveal our sources.
Methods.
And we don't want to do that.
And we don't want to do that.
I mean, you open up the black box.
But you see, what matters about this report, if you don't do that, then the principles and the oversight are all the more important. And it's the oversight, especially, we have to take a serious look at ourselves in comparison to the British and the Americans, who take oversight much more seriously than we do in this country.
And I would say that especially now that we've had the two unfortunate incidents in Ottawa and Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, which have created a new atmosphere in which we are going to go after people. So now, I support what Janice says, is now it's all the more needed that we actually do something about oversight.
Understood. Thanks, you two, for this. Appreciate your coming into TVO tonight and helping us out with this. Janice Stein, Kamran Bukhari.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.